Okay, so just a couple things I want to point out that I did in my drawing. Um, Obviously, I'm going to have a list of all the different forms that you need to work with, but just getting them kind of mapped out and then starting to connect them to the vanishing point. You'll notice the S, I wanted to show that it was closer than the triangular form here. So I worked with the S first, and then when this form ran into the other form, it stops. That way this shape appears to overlap from this form. Another thing, I went ahead, even though this is kind of a smooth edge, rounded edge to this form, I went ahead and I put a few lines, not that there's a hard edge there, but when I go to recreate this edge here to shorten it, these lines will help me with the angles and the proportions. But technically, because this is smooth, it doesn't mean that I would actually have a point here unless it was pointed. Let's see. And then working with circles, remember when you're trying to find that edge line, you want to go from the furthest point. So a lot of times I would take my ruler and just kind of mark it, or even start at the vanishing point and then slowly move my ruler close to the form, and then the farthest edge that it first touches, that's where your line should meet up. Another one of the illusions that I want to talk about and how I worked with 1 point is on your requirement list. It talks about a form that's divided into several sections, but then it has the illusion that space is between them. So pretending that this is kind of like a loaf of bread, as you can see that I started with the square form, connected it to the vanishing point, and then I divided it several times. As in, here's the end of this box. So this becomes the front, the top, and the side. But then I did it several more times to show that this box has been divided, almost like cut into sections. So that means if this is the top, this is going to then become the front of the next box, and it should mimic the original form. So if I take this horizontal line here, and I recreate that here, and then bring this line down to get that angle. I'm drawing like it's see-through. You would see that I get the front of this box that looks like this box. And I just label them with letters because it makes it easier for me to read the illusion. So I'm going to keep this line and this line, but the other ones I'm going to erase. And then this line gets erased because there's not a line going through this form. And this becomes the side, and this becomes the top of the box. And then you can erase some of these extra lines now that you don't need anymore. So this is kind of nice. So it's kind of like two boxes that are the same, but they're getting smaller as they go back. So this will definitely be one of the more challenging ones, but I'd like to see you guys try it out. If you wanted to apply that to a circle, think of this as the front of that circle, the side, and I just repeated this curve here several times. This becomes the side, so front, side, alternating. So that means if this is a front, it needs to mimic this shape. So that's when I'm going to repeat that circle here. And then I erase the lines I don't need. These are just the converging lines. Remember to keep your converging lines short. Or I'm sorry, soft, because you're going to erase a lot of them. And then I could erase the letters on my boxes. I won't need those anymore. Okay, so a couple more things I wanted to talk about. I talked to you guys about having forms that look like they're divided and then separated. So I did that in the instructions as far as, you know, taking a pause and showing you. But then in my time lapse, I went ahead and made this one a divided form. And sometimes it's okay to kind of free draw some things just because I, you know, drew this by hand. So I recreated one here and this becomes the side. And then another thing that I added is making this box appear to be hollow. So I didn't want it to look paper thin, so I gave it a little bit of a thickness by drawing a smaller version of it on the front and then taking the corners and connecting it. So I took this to the vanishing point, this corner, because these corners would cut through the shape. So this was really the only one I ended up seeing. Now, as far as showing how long it goes for, if you take this corner and I brought this down to mimic, to be parallel to this edge, that gave me the end point, which then that point gave me this angle because it mimics this right here. It's parallel to this. And then to get this inner wall, like on this one, I connected it there. If you want to make any others hollow, like I said, if you want to make it look like it has a little bit of a thickness to it, I just draw kind of like a smaller version on the inside of it, so that when we apply shading to these, you can do a lot more depth and forms, show a lot more depth and form in your forms, I should say. So I can make this appear hollow when I go to shade it in. Sometimes I like to add shapes that look like they're on top of another shape. So I'll do that here too. So here you can see that I added, instead of making it look hollow, like an innie inside the circle, I made more of an outie. I don't know if that makes sense, but kind of like a little mini cylinder on top of another cylinder. So this would end up being the side and this would be the front. I think adding the value is going to help really add a clear distinction between where your forms are at, how they're overlapping. That just really brings a sense to the illusion. So that'll be the next step. So here you want to apply some shading. So feel free to erase any lines you no longer need. So I'm going to do that. And then think of the front of your shape. So where your eyes are coming from, that there's light hitting your forms. So the front of your shapes, or the front of your forms, is going to be the lightest area. And then the light is going to stretch and get darker as it gets further away. Now, when we're looking at forms that have more than two sides, so the front, top, and side, so I'm looking at, you know, other angles that I have to work from. Think about your light, not just coming from the front, but maybe even from the side. So maybe the right side of your forms, if the light is coming this way, then this side of the shape is always going to be darker than the right side. Couple things I wanted to point out as far as the shading technique. I did use a cotton swab for blending, just because I realized I didn't have a blending stump. Couple other things, thinking about the light value, so the lightest point being the front of the shape and how it hits the top of the form, so it's a little bit darker. Same thing with the inside here, a little bit darker, but then it's at its most darkest point. I put that on the sides. And then it just gradually fades as it gets further back, and that's where I went over with a couple different layers of graphite, using more of like, starting with my 2B and then going in with my 4B, my 6B, and just kind of building up those layers.